Manhattan's skyline glittered against the dusk, a testament to wealth and power. On the 52nd floor of one of these magnificent towers, Jackson Montgomery surveyed his domain through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 45, he was the embodiment of the American dream, a self-made tech magnate whose software company had revolutionized cybersecurity. Everything about his penthouse apartment, from the minimalist furniture to the priceless art, spoke of refinement and privilege. Tonight, he was hosting an exclusive dinner. The table was set with crystal and silver, the chef preparing a 7-course meal. Jackson adjusted his custom-tailored suit and checked his reflection. Not a hair out of place. Control was his religion, and perfection its prayer. "Is everything ready?" he asked, not bothering to turn as his wife entered the room. Eleanor Montgomery, with her honey-blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, stepped forward in a designer gown that caught the light like liquid silver. "Everything is perfect," she replied, her voice carrying the practiced tone she'd cultivated over their 7 years of marriage. To society, they were the golden couple, featured in magazines, photographed at charity galas, admired and envied. Their wedding had been the social event of the year, uniting old money with new innovation. But behind closed doors, their relationship had calcified into something hollow, a performance without an audience. Eleanor moved to the window, careful, to maintain a respectful distance from her husband. At 34, she was still breathtaking, her features delicate yet striking. Before meeting Jackson, she had been climbing the ranks at a prestigious art gallery, her keen eye and natural charm opening doors that her middle-class background had kept closed. Now she was Mrs. Montgomery, curator of their social calendar and hostess extraordinaire. "The Harringtons confirmed they're bringing that new investor," she said, filling the silence. "The one from Seattle?" Jackson nodded, checking his watch. "Good, I want him impressed. He's sitting next to you. Make him feel special." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor had become accustomed to her role as Jackson's social ambassador, using her warmth to soften his intensity. It was business, she told herself. Just business. "Of course," she replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. The first guests arrived exactly on time, as Jackson expected. The Harringtons, Thomas and Victoria, entered with practiced smiles, accompanied by a man Eleanor hadn't seen before. He hung back slightly, observing the opulence with quiet interest rather than the usual awe. "Jackson, Eleanor, may I present Ethan Reed," Thomas announced, gesturing to the newcomer, "the genius behind that AI integration I was telling you about." Ethan stepped forward, extending his hand. He was tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see beyond surfaces. His suit was well made but not ostentatious, and he wore it with an ease that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin. "Mr. Montgomery," he said, his voice deep and measured. "It's an honor to meet the man who built Aegis from the ground up." Jackson shook his hand firmly. "The honor is mine. Your work on predictive algorithms is impressive." Then Ethan turned to Eleanor. Something shifted in his expression, subtle but unmistakable. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, taking her hand. His touch lingered a fraction too long. "Thomas didn't mention that Jackson's wife would be so knowledgeable about contemporary art. I spotted your dissertation on emerging New York artists in the Columbia archives last month." Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. It had been years since anyone had mentioned her academic work. "You've read my dissertation?" "Cover to cover," Ethan replied with a genuine smile. "Your analysis of how economic pressure shapes artistic innovation was fascinating." Jackson's arm slid around Eleanor's waist, his grip tightening imperceptibly. "My wife has many talents," he said, steering the conversation back to safer territory. "Shall we move to the dining room?" Throughout dinner, Eleanor found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Ethan. Unlike the other guests who were engrossed in discussions of market trends and investment opportunities, he asked questions that required thought. When she spoke, he listened, truly listened, as if her words had value beyond their social utility. "Eleanor curated our entire collection," Jackson announced, when the conversation turned to the striking sculpture in the corner. "She has an exceptional eye." "I'd love to hear about your process," Ethan said, turning to her. "How do you decide what speaks to you?" The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her perspective, rather than complimenting her selections. "I look for pieces that make me feel something real," she admitted. "Art that reveals truth beneath beauty." "Or beauty beneath truth," Ethan offered, his eyes meeting hers. A current of understanding passed between them, brief but electric. Eleanor looked away first, reaching for her wineglass to hide the flush creeping up her neck. After dinner, the guests migrated to the living room for drinks. Eleanor excused herself to check on dessert, needing a moment of solitude. In the kitchen, she braced herself against the marble countertop, breathing deeply. What was wrong with her? One conversation with an interesting man, and she was behaving like a schoolgirl. "May I help?" She turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, holding an empty ice bucket. "Thomas sent me on an ice mission," he explained with a self-deprecating smile. "Though I suspect he was trying to include me in a conversation where I was clearly out of my depth. Something about yacht specifications." Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, not the polite tinkle she usually offered at these functions. "The freezer is behind you," she said, "and I understand completely. Last month I had to endure an hour-long debate about golf courses." As he filled the bucket, Ethan asked, "Do you ever miss it, the art world?" The question pierced through her practiced facade. "Every day," she admitted before she could stop herself. "Then why," he began, but was interrupted by Jackson's appearance. "Everything all right in here?" Her husband's voice was pleasant, but Eleanor recognized the steel beneath it. "Just getting ice," Ethan said smoothly, holding up the bucket. "And admiring your kitchen. The design is impeccable." Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed the situation. "Eleanor has excellent taste," he said, placing a hand on the small of her back. "We should rejoin our guests." As the evening wound down, Eleanor found herself watching Ethan across the room. He was engaged in conversation with Jackson, both men animated as they discussed technology's future. There was something refreshing about the way Ethan held his ground against Jackson's domineering presence, neither intimidated nor antagonistic. When the time came for goodbyes, Ethan shook her hand formally. "It was a pleasure, Mrs. Montgomery," he said, but his eyes conveyed something more. He pressed a business card into her palm. "I'd love to show you some emerging artists I've been following. Professional curiosity only, of course." Eleanor slipped the card into her dress pocket, heart beating faster than it had in years. "Of course," she echoed. After the last guest departed, Jackson loosened his tie. "Reed is smart," he remarked. "Too smart to waste his time on art galleries. I'm bringing him into our next project." Eleanor nodded absently, her fingers tracing the edge of the card in her pocket. For the first time in years, she felt a flutter of something dangerous. Hope. The Metropolitan Museum of Art buzzed with the quiet energy of a Thursday afternoon. Eleanor wandered through the modern wing, her heels clicking softly against the polished floors. This was her sanctuary, the one place she still visited regularly without Jackson. He found museums inefficient, preferring to acquire art rather than contemplate it. She paused before a striking abstract canvas, losing herself in its chaotic swirls of color. 3 weeks had passed since the dinner party, and Ethan Reed's business card remained hidden in her jewelry box, untouched but not forgotten. She had told herself repeatedly that she wouldn't call him. What would be the point? A friendship with another man would only complicate her already precarious existence. The artist was having a nervous breakdown when he painted this. Eleanor startled at the familiar voice. Turning, she found Ethan standing beside her, hands casually tucked into the pockets of his charcoal peacoat. "Mr. Reed," she managed, her heart suddenly racing. "What a coincidence." His smile was warm but knowing. "Is it? I mentioned in my note that I come here most Thursdays." "Note?" Eleanor frowned. "On the back of my card." Heat flooded her cheeks. She had been so concerned with hiding the card that she hadn't thought to turn it over. "I didn't see it," she admitted. "And yet, here you are." His eyes held no judgment, only gentle amusement. The universe works in mysterious ways, Mrs. Montgomery. Eleanor, she corrected, surprising herself. Please. Eleanor, he repeated as if testing the sound. Then I'm Ethan. They moved through the gallery together, falling into an easy conversation about the exhibits. Eleanor found herself gesturing more animatedly than usual, her voice rising and falling with enthusiasm as they debated artistic merits and historical contexts. You're different here, Ethan observed as they paused before a sculpture. Different. More. Alive, he said simply. More yourself, I think. The observation should have offended her, but instead it felt like recognition. Art does that to me, she admitted. Always has. And what does Jackson think of your passion? Eleanor's smile faltered. He appreciates the investment potential. She changed the subject quickly. Thomas mentioned you're working with Aegis now. Consulting on their new AI project, Ethan confirmed. Your husband is intense. That's one word for... They shared a look of understanding before Ethan checked his watch. I have a meeting uptown in an hour, but I was heading to the cafe first. Would you join me for coffee? Everything about this felt dangerous, and yet Eleanor heard herself accept. In the museum cafe, they claimed a small table by the window. Sunlight streamed in, catching the golden flecks in Ethan's eyes. He was handsome, but not in the polished, perfected way of Jackson and his circle. There was something genuine about him, a quality that couldn't be purchased or manufactured. So, he said, stirring his coffee, what happened between the brilliant art scholar and the gallery world? Eleanor tensed. I got married. And marriage requires abandoning one's passions. It's complicated, she hedged. Jackson's work demands a certain lifestyle. I manage our social obligations, our homes, our appearances. That sounds like a job description, not a marriage, Ethan observed mildly. Eleanor's defenses rose. You don't understand. Jackson gave me a life I never could have had otherwise. At what cost? The question hung between them, too honest to dismiss. You're very direct, she said instead of answering. Life's too short for anything else. Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest. I apologize if I've overstepped. I just sense that you're constrained. The woman who wrote that dissertation wouldn't recognize the life you're living now. The truth of his words stung. People change, she said quietly. They do, he agreed, but usually because they want to, not because they're required to. Eleanor stared into her coffee cup, unsure how to respond. No one in her social circle would dare speak to her this way. They all understood the unwritten rules. Maintain appearances, never question arrangements, keep the facade intact. Tell me about your work, she said, redirecting the conversation. What exactly does an AI ethicist do? Ethan accepted the change of topic gracefully. I make sure the machines we're building reflect our best selves, not our worst impulses. His passion was evident as he described his research. AI learns from human behavior. If we're not careful, we encode all our biases and limitations into these systems. And you're helping Jackson avoid that? Trying to, Ethan admitted. Your husband is more concerned with efficiency than ethics. We've had some robust discussions. Eleanor couldn't help but smile, imagining those confrontations. Jackson wasn't accustomed to being challenged. I should probably get going, she said reluctantly, noting the time. I have a charity board meeting at 3. As they walked toward the exit, Ethan asked, would it be completely inappropriate if I asked to see you again? Eleanor froze. Yes, she said honestly, it would be. I thought so. He nodded, no trace of surprise in his expression. Just professional interest in your artistic expertise, of course. Of course, she echoed, not believing it for a second. There's an exhibition opening next week at the Whitney, he continued. New artists addressing technology's impact on human connection. Very relevant to my work. I could use an educated perspective. Eleanor knew she should refuse. This wasn't just about art, and they both knew it. Whatever was developing between them, this fragile, unnamed thing, would only lead to complications. I can't, she said finally. Ethan accepted her decision with a graceful nod. If you change your mind, it's Thursday evening. I'll leave your name at the door." He handed her a small exhibition pamphlet. No pressure, no expectations. Their goodbye was formal, a handshake, a polite smile. But as Eleanor watched him walk away, something unfamiliar and dangerous twisted in her chest. Longing. That evening, Jackson worked late, as he often did. Eleanor moved through their penthouse like a ghost, touching objects without seeing them. The spaciousness that once impressed her now felt hollow, a gilded cage stretching into infinity. She found herself in front of the bedroom mirror, studying her reflection. The woman who stared back was beautiful, polished, perfect, and utterly unknown to her. When had she disappeared inside this carefully curated exterior? On impulse, she pulled out the exhibition pamphlet Ethan had given her. The featured artwork showed a fractured human face, half flesh and half digital, with lines of code running through it. "Disconnected, Art in the Age of Technological Intimacy," the title proclaimed. Eleanor tucked it back into her purse just as her phone buzzed with a message from Jackson. "Client dinner tomorrow. Wear the blue Valentino. Meeting with the Vandermeer. Foundation Saturday. Confirm the donation amount with my assistant. Sunday brunch with the Petersons cancelled. Reschedule for next month." No greeting, no sign-off, just directives, as if she were another of his efficient systems. Eleanor sent back a simple "okay" and set the phone down, a familiar emptiness washing over her. Later, she found herself in their home office, opening her laptop for the first time in days. On a whim, she searched for her old dissertation. The academic database required a password she no longer remembered. Instead, she typed "Ethan Reed AI Ethics" into the search bar. Pages of results appeared: interviews, papers, TED Talks. In one video thumbnail, Ethan stood on a stage, gesturing passionately. She clicked play, and his voice filled the room. "The systems we create reflect who we are," he was saying. "When we prioritize efficiency over humanity, we encode that value into our technology, and it comes back to us multiplied. We build prisons of our own design, beautiful and terrible." Eleanor shivered, the words piercing something tender within her. She hadn't realized how deeply she'd buried her own voice until she heard someone else speaking truths she'd been afraid to acknowledge. When Jackson came home after midnight, she was already in bed, pretending to sleep. He moved through their bedroom efficiently, his routine so familiar she could track his location by sound alone. When he finally slid beneath the sheets, not touching her, Eleanor opened her eyes to stare into the darkness. Tomorrow, she would go through the motions. She would wear the blue Valentino. She would charm Jackson's clients. She would be exactly what was expected of her. But Thursday remained unwritten. The Whitney Museum glowed against the Manhattan skyline as Eleanor approached, her heart pounding with each step. She'd changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on a simple black dress that wouldn't draw attention. For the first time in years, she'd left her wedding ring at home, tucked safely in her jewelry box. It wasn't a conscious decision to deceive, more an experiment in rediscovering who she might be without the weight of Jackson's name. Inside, the exhibition space buzzed with energy. Art students, critics, and trendy New Yorkers mingled among installations that blended technology with traditional mediums. Eleanor scanned the crowd, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. What if he didn't come? Worse, what if he did? "I was hoping you'd change your mind." She turned to find Ethan standing beside her, his expression warm but cautious. In dark jeans and a charcoal blazer, he looked less like a tech executive and more like an artist himself. "I surprised myself," she admitted. "I told Jackson I was meeting an old college friend." "Your first lie?" Ethan asked, his tone gentle rather than accusatory. Eleanor considered this. "No," she said finally, "just the first one that feels significant." He nodded, understanding the weight of her admission. "Thank you for trusting me with that." They moved through the exhibition together, pausing before each piece. Unlike the stilted conversations at Jackson's business functions, their discussion flowed naturally, building on shared observations and respectful disagreements. Eleanor found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, as Ethan recounted a disastrous tech conference where an AI demonstration had gone spectacularly wrong. The poor robot was supposed to serve coffee, he explained, eyes crinkling with amusement. Instead, it kept insisting everyone needed more fiber in their diet. Someone had accidentally uploaded a health coach algorithm. As the evening progressed, they gradually revealed pieces of themselves. Eleanor learned that Ethan had grown up in Seattle with parents who taught literature and philosophy at the university. His transition to technology had been fueled by a desire to ensure that humanity's perspectives weren't lost in the digital revolution. "What about you?" he asked, as they sat on a bench before a particularly moving installation, a wall of screens, showing people's faces as they connected with loved ones across digital platforms. "What made you fall in love with art?" Eleanor watched the faces on the screens, joy, confusion, longing, all filtered through digital pixels. "My father was an architect," she said softly. "Not famous, but passionate. He would take me to museums from the time I could walk, teaching me to really see buildings, paintings, sculptures, not just look at them." She smiled at the memory. "He said art was humanity's conversation with eternity. He sounds remarkable." He was. Eleanor's smile faded. "He had a stroke when I was in graduate school. The medical bills. Well, that's why I took the gallery. Job instead of pursuing academia. I needed something that paid immediately, not eventually." Understanding dawned on Ethan's face, and Jackson offered security. "Among other things," she acknowledged. "He was charming, successful, completely certain of everything. After years of financial struggle and watching my father's slow decline, Jackson's world seemed solid, unshakable. And now," Eleanor met his gaze, "now I wonder if I traded too much for that certainty." The honesty between them felt both terrifying and liberating. When Ethan's hand brushed against hers on the bench, Eleanor didn't pull away. The simple contact, skin against skin, sent a current through her that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with genuine connection. "Would you like to get some air?" Ethan asked. "There's a rooftop garden." The garden was nearly empty, most guests having gravitated toward the bar inside. New York stretched before them, a constellation of lights against the darkness. Eleanor leaned against the railing, letting the cool evening breeze wash over her. "Sometimes I forget how beautiful this city is," she murmured. Ethan stood beside her, close but not touching. "We stop seeing things when they become familiar. That's why art is so important. It forces us to look again with fresh eyes." "Is that what you're doing for me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider it. "Helping me see my life with fresh eyes?" He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I think we're doing that for each other." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Eleanor knew that if she leaned forward just slightly, everything would change. Part of her wanted that change desperately, craved it like oxygen after years of holding her breath. Instead, she stepped back. "I should go," she said quietly. "It's getting late." Disappointment flickered across Ethan's face, but he nodded. "I'll walk you to a cab." As they made their way through the museum, Eleanor's phone buzzed insistently in her purse. She ignored it until they reached the street, where Ethan hailed a taxi for her. "Thank you for coming," he said as the cab pulled up. "Tonight meant a lot to me." "To me as well," she admitted. When he didn't make a move to suggest meeting again, Eleanor felt a twist of anxiety. Had she misjudged his interest? "There's a small gallery in Soho featuring local artists next week," she found herself saying. "Nothing fancy, but their curator has an excellent eye." Ethan's smile returned. "I'd love to see it. With you." As the cab pulled away, Eleanor finally checked her phone. 6 missed calls from Jackson, followed by a text that made her blood run cold. "Meeting your college friend Lauren? Interesting, since she called the house looking for you an hour. Zago, we need to talk." The world seemed to contract around her. Lauren, her actual college friend, wasn't supposed to call. They had tentative plans for next week, not tonight. Eleanor's hands trembled as she typed a response. "Mix up with dates, on my way home now." Jackson's reply came instantly. "I'm at the office, dealing with the Reed situation. Don't wait up." The Reed situation? Eleanor's mind raced. Had Jackson Somehow discovered her meeting with Ethan, but how could he know? And why would he be addressing it as a business matter? By the time she arrived at their penthouse, Eleanor had constructed a plausible explanation for her whereabouts, but the apartment was empty, just as Jackson had said. Relief mingled with a strange disappointment. Part of her had been ready for the confrontation, for the chance to finally speak truths that had been buried for too long. Unable to sleep, she poured herself a glass of wine and wandered into Jackson's study. His laptop sat on the desk, still open. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before sitting down to look at the screen. An email chain was visible, the most recent from Jackson to the head of security at Aegis. Surveillance confirmed. Reed met with Chinese investors last week. Get me everything, phone records, financials, contacts. I want him destroyed by morning. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Jackson wasn't tracking her movements. He was investigating Ethan. But why? What had happened between them? She scrolled through the previous emails, piecing together the story. Apparently, Ethan had voiced strong ethical concerns about Aegis's new AI project, threatening to withdraw his support publicly if certain changes weren't made. Jackson was retaliating by looking for dirt, any leverage to discredit him. Attached to one email was a surveillance photo taken through a restaurant window, showing Ethan dining with two Asian men. The timestamp was from 3 days ago, the same afternoon Eleanor had met him at the museum. She closed the laptop, feeling sick. Jackson's vindictiveness was nothing new, but seeing it directed at Ethan, someone she had come to care about, made it suddenly, viscerally real. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for a wonderful evening. The world. Looks different when seen through your eyes. Eleanor stared at the message, torn between joy and terror. She should delete it immediately, block the number, end whatever this was before it truly began. That would be the safe choice, the prudent choice. Instead, she typed back, the gallery opening is Tuesday at 7. I'll be wearing red. Only after sending it did she realize what she'd done. She hadn't just arranged another meeting. She'd sent a clear signal of her intentions. Red was a declaration, a flare in the darkness. She moved to the window, staring out at the city that never slept. Somewhere out there, Ethan was reading her message, perhaps smiling at its implications. And somewhere, Jackson was assembling weapons against him, unaware that his wife had just placed herself in the crossfire. For years, Eleanor had lived in a gilded cage, convincing herself it was a palace. Now the bars were visible, and beyond them a world of color and chaos beckoned. The choice facing her was stark: security or freedom, certainty or possibility. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Eleanor watched the light change, transforming the city from a sea of darkness, punctuated by artificial stars, to a landscape of concrete and possibility. She hadn't slept, but she'd never felt more awake. The red dress hung on Eleanor's closet door like a confession. She'd purchased it during a rare solo shopping trip, hiding the receipt from Jackson, who monitored their finances with meticulous precision. Unlike her usual wardrobe of muted elegance, this dress demanded attention. Fitted without being tight, the color of passion without apology. You're distracted, Jackson observed over breakfast, not looking up from his tablet. 5 days had passed since her discovery in his office, and Eleanor had maintained a careful facade of normalcy, even as anxiety churned beneath her composed exterior. Just planning for the charity gala next month, she lied smoothly, having learned from years of practice how to modulate her voice to convey calm certainty. Jackson's eyes finally lifted to her face, his gaze assessing. I've been thinking, he said, setting down his device. Perhaps we should consider that vacation we've discussed. St. Bart's, maybe. After this Reed situation is handled. Eleanor forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. What exactly is the Reed situation? You mentioned it the other night. A flicker of surprise crossed Jackson's features. He wasn't accustomed to her asking about business matters. Just cleaning house, he said dismissively. Reed's consulting contract is being terminated. Creative differences. I thought you were impressed with his work. I was, Jackson conceded, his tone hardening. Until he started making demands about project parameters, that weren't his concern. Now, he's meeting with competitors. Is that unusual in your industry? Eleanor kept her tone casual, reaching for her coffee cup to hide the tremor in her hands. Jackson's expression turned sharp. Why the sudden interest? He seemed intelligent at dinner, she said with a carefully calibrated shrug. I'm surprised. That's all. Intelligence without loyalty is dangerous, Jackson replied, his voice dropping to the quiet intensity that Eleanor had learned to fear. Reed made a critical mistake. He thought his ethics were more important than his commitments. The subtext wasn't subtle. Jackson valued loyalty above all else, in business and in marriage. Eleanor changed the subject, steering the conversation towards safer territory, but the warning had been delivered. After Jackson left for the office, Eleanor sat alone in their expansive kitchen, turning her wedding ring around her finger. The platinum band felt heavier than usual, a tangible reminder of promises made and compromises accepted. The life she had built with Jackson offered security, status, and a particular kind of freedom. Freedom from want, from financial worry, from the grinding anxiety that had defined her early adulthood. But what had she sacrificed for this security, and was she willing to risk it all for something as fragile and undefined as her connection with Ethan? The Soho Gallery was tucked between a vintage clothing store and an artisanal coffee shop, its entrance marked only by a small placard. Eleanor arrived 15 minutes early, her heart racing as if she'd run the entire way from the cab. The red dress felt both like armor and a declaration of war. Inside, the space was intimate. White walls, polished concrete floors, and carefully placed lighting that highlighted a collection of works by emerging artists. The gallery owner, Mia, greeted Eleanor warmly. "Been too long," Mia said, embracing her. "I was thrilled when you called. I've missed your eye." Eleanor had once been a regular at these openings before Jackson had subtly steered her toward more prestigious establishments where art was less about expression and more about investment. "The work looks spectacular," she said sincerely, gesturing to a striking mixed media piece. "That one's by a former tech executive who quit to pursue art full-time," Mia explained. "Fascinating. Perspective on digital disconnection." Eleanor moved through the gallery, reacquainting herself with the joy of discovering new talent. When Ethan arrived, precisely on time, he paused in the doorway, his gaze finding her instantly. The appreciation in his eyes as he took in the red dress made Eleanor's pulse quicken. "You came," she said as he approached. "You're wearing red," he replied simply, as if that explained everything. They moved through the exhibition together, their conversation flowing naturally between art criticism and personal revelation. Eleanor found herself sharing stories she had almost forgotten. Her first gallery job, the thesis advisor who had changed her perspective on contemporary art, the tiny apartment where she'd lived before meeting Jackson. "I miss that version of myself sometimes," she admitted as they paused before a haunting photograph of an abandoned building. She was struggling, but she was authentic. "She's still there," Ethan said, his voice low. "I see her." The intimacy of his words, of being truly seen, sent a shiver through Eleanor. When his fingers brushed against hers, she didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed their hands to intertwine, the simple contact more thrilling than she had anticipated. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, even as she tightened her grip on his hand. "I know," Ethan acknowledged. "Neither should I." "Jackson is terminating your contract," she blurted out, unable to keep the information to herself any longer. "He thinks you're meeting with competitors." Ethan's expression darkened. "I suspected as much, but I'm not meeting with competitors. I'm meeting with regulatory officials. Your husband is developing an AI system that could potentially access private data without proper consent." "That doesn't sound like Jackson," Eleanor protested automatically, though unease pooled in her stomach. "Doesn't it?" Ethan asked gently. "The Jackson I've come to know values efficiency and profit above all else. Ethics are secondary considerations at best." The description matched the man she lived with, though she had never articulated it so bluntly. "What are you going to do?" "What I have to," Ethan replied. Some lines shouldn't be crossed, no matter the professional cost. His integrity both impressed and terrified her. Jackson did not respond well to challenges, especially public ones. "He'll try to discredit you," she warned. "He has people looking into your background, your finances." "Let him look," Ethan said with quiet confidence. "I have nothing to hide." Commotion at the gallery entrance drew their attention. Eleanor's blood froze as she recognized Thomas Harrington, Jackson's closest associate, entering with a woman she didn't know. They hadn't seen her yet, but discovery was moments away. "I need to go," she whispered urgently, dropping Ethan's hand. Jackson's business partner just walked in. Ethan nodded, understanding immediately. "Is there a back exit?" Eleanor led him through a door marked "Staff Only," her mind racing. Mia looked up from her desk in surprise as they burst into the small office space. "We need the back door," Eleanor explained hastily. "Thomas Harrington is here." Understanding dawned on Mia's face. She had known Eleanor long enough to understand the implications. "Through the storage room," she directed, pointing to another door. "It leads to the alley." They hurried through a cramped room filled with crates and bubble wrap, emerging into a narrow alleyway behind the building. The spring evening had turned cool, and Eleanor shivered in her thin dress. Without a word, Ethan slipped off his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured, "both for the jacket and the quick escape." "What now?" Ethan asked, his expression serious in the dim light. Eleanor glanced at her watch. "I told Jackson I was having dinner with Mia to discuss a potential donation to her gallery program for underprivileged artists. I have about 2 hours before. I need to be home." "Dinner, then," Ethan suggested. "There's a small place a few blocks from here, off the beaten path. No chance of running into anyone from Jackson's circle." The restaurant was exactly as promised. Tiny, unpretentious, and far from the upscale establishments frequented by Manhattan's elite. Tucked into a corner booth, Eleanor felt herself relax for the first time in days. "I've been thinking about you," Ethan admitted after they ordered, "more than I should." "Same," Eleanor confessed, the word barely audible over the restaurant's ambient noise. "It's complicated." "Is it?" Ethan asked, his gaze direct. "The complicated part seems to be your marriage, not what's happening between us." Eleanor traced the rim of her water glass, gathering her thoughts. "I made vows, Ethan. Whatever problems exist between Jackson and me, I can't just ignore that commitment." "I respect that," he said, "but I also believe that vows aren't meant to be prisons. They're promises made between two people who choose each other freely, every day." "And when one stops choosing?" she asked, the question that had haunted her for years finally spoken aloud. "Then it's not really a marriage anymore. It's an arrangement." Ethan replied gently. "From everything you've told me, Jackson chose you for what you represent, not who you are." The truth of his words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. She had known this, of course, had felt it in every calculated interaction, every performance of their perfect life together. But hearing it articulated so clearly made it impossible to ignore. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted. "That's the terrifying part. I've spent so long being Jackson Montgomery's wife that Eleanor has disappeared." Ethan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I see her," he said again. "She's brilliant and passionate and alive. She has opinions about conceptual art and remembers the names of every gallery assistant she meets. She notices details others miss and asks questions that matter." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. "You make me sound remarkable." "You are," he said simply. "Jackson may have provided a certain kind of life, but he buried the most extraordinary parts of you in the process." Their food arrived, momentarily interrupting the intensity between them. As they ate, the conversation turned to lighter topics: books they loved, places they hoped to visit, childhood memories that had shaped them. Eleanor found herself laughing more in those 2 hours than she had in months. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor knew she needed to return to her reality. "I should get back," she said reluctantly. Outside the restaurant, they stood close together in the shelter of a storefront awning, neither quite ready to say goodbye. The city moved around them, taxis honking, pedestrians hurrying past, the fear. Perpetual motion of New York, but in their small space time seemed suspended. "Whatever happens with Jackson and the project," Eleanor said finally, "be careful. He doesn't respond well to public challenges." "I can handle Jackson," Ethan assured her. "I'm more concerned about you." "Me? Are you happy, Eleanor?" The question was direct, unavoidable. She looked away, watching raindrops begin to fall, on the pavement. "Happiness wasn't part of the agreement," she said softly. "It should be," Ethan replied. "It has to be." When he stepped closer, Eleanor knew she should move away. Instead, she found herself drawn toward him like a magnet finding its opposite pole. His hand came up to gently touch her face, and she leaned into the contact, starved for genuine tenderness. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight," he murmured. "Just know that there are options. There are always options." The rain began to fall more heavily, providing the excuse they both needed to end the moment before it progressed further. Ethan hailed a taxi, opening the door for her. "Your jacket." Eleanor remembered starting to remove it. "Keep it," he said. "Return it next time." The assumption that there would be a next time hung between them, a promise neither was willing to rescind. Eleanor nodded, sliding into the cab. As it pulled away, she watched Ethan's figure grow smaller in the rain, already missing his presence. Back at the penthouse, Eleanor carefully hung the red dress in the very back of her closet, tucking Ethan's jacket behind it. She showered and changed into silk pajamas, washing away the physical evidence of the evening while holding tight to the emotional impact. She was reviewing the calendar on her tablet when Jackson returned home, his expression thunderous. Without greeting her, he strode to the bar and poured himself a generous measure of scotch. "How was your meeting with Mia?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Productive," Eleanor replied evenly. "Her program for young artists has real potential. I told her we'd consider a donation." Jackson swirled his drink, studying the amber liquid. "Interesting, because Thomas said he saw you at the gallery tonight, with Ethan Reed." Eleanor's heart stuttered, but years of navigating Jackson's moods had taught her to maintain composure under pressure. "Yes, he happened to be there. We exchanged pleasantries." In the back room, Jackson's voice had taken on the dangerous quietness she recognized as the calm before a storm. "Thomas said you disappeared rather suddenly when you saw him." "I was showing Ethan some pieces in storage," she improvised. "Mia thought he might be interested in supporting the gallery." Jackson set his glass down with deliberate care. "Do you think I'm stupid, Eleanor?" "Of course not," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Then don't insult my intelligence." He moved closer, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. "I know Reed is trying to derail my project, and now I find my wife conspiring with him behind my back." "It wasn't like that," Eleanor protested. "It was coincidence." "Nothing in business is coincidence," Jackson replied coldly. "And make no mistake, our marriage is a business arrangement, one that has been very beneficial for you." The cruelty of his assessment, so similar to what Ethan had suggested, yet so different in intent, left Eleanor momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it emerged stronger than she expected. "Is that all this is to you, a business arrangement?" "It's what it's always been," Jackson stated, his expression impassive. "You got security and status. I got a presentable wife, who enhances my image. Don't pretend you didn't understand the terms." Though she had long suspected this was how Jackson viewed their union, hearing it stated so boldly was still devastating. "And if I want something more?" she asked quietly. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before it settled back into cool assessment. "More what, exactly? You have everything money can buy. What else could you possibly need?" The gulf between them had never been more apparent. "Connection," she said simply. "Meaning, joy." Jackson actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "You've been spending too much time in those art galleries. This isn't a romance novel, Eleanor. This is real life, and in real life, people make practical choices." "I made a practical choice 7 years ago," Eleanor acknowledged, "but I'm not the same person anymore." Something dangerous flashed in Jackson's eyes. "Let me be very clear," he said, his voice low. Your little adventure with Reed ends now. I won't have my wife undermining my business interests. You can't control who I speak to, Eleanor said, surprising herself with her defiance. Actually, I can, Jackson countered smoothly. Our prenuptial agreement has a fidelity clause with very specific language about appropriate behavior. One more meeting with Reed, and you leave this marriage with nothing. The threat hung in the air between them, its implications crystal clear. Eleanor had signed that agreement in a haze of romantic optimism, never imagining she would test its boundaries. Now it stood like a wall between her and the freedom she was just beginning to crave. So that's it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Stay away from Ethan or lose everything. I prefer to think of it as a reminder of your priorities, Jackson replied, his composure fully restored, now that he believed he had regained control. We've built a good life, Eleanor. Don't throw it away on a fleeting infatuation. He finished his scotch and headed toward their bedroom, pausing in the doorway. I've arranged for us to spend the weekend at the Hamptons house. Thomas and Victoria will join us. The change of scenery will do you good. Clear your head. When he was gone, Eleanor remained frozen in place, the full weight of her situation pressing down upon her. Jackson had drawn his line in the sand. The choice now was stark. Security or freedom, certainty or possibility. As midnight approached, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. Thank you for tonight. Whatever you decide, know that I see you, the real you, that's rare and worth protecting. Eleanor stared at the screen, tears blurring her vision. For years she had traded authenticity for security, passion for stability. The bargain had seemed reasonable until she was reminded of what it felt like to be truly alive. She deleted the message but couldn't delete the feeling behind it. Something had awakened in her, something that could not easily be put back to sleep. The Hamptons estate stretched before Eleanor like a glossy magazine spread, manicured lawns rolling down to a private beach, the Olympic-sized pool reflecting clouds that drifted across a perfect blue sky. A weekend paradise for Manhattan's elite, designed to showcase wealth while providing the illusion of casual relaxation. Eleanor stood on the terrace, coffee cup in hand, watching the morning light dance across the water. In the distance, Jackson and Thomas walked along the beach, deep in conversation, their gestures animated. Planning, strategizing, calculating, always working, even in this supposed retreat. He doesn't appreciate what he has, Victoria Harrington observed, joining Eleanor on the terrace. In her 50s, Victoria carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had navigated high society for decades, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. Jackson works hard, Eleanor replied automatically, the defensive response ingrained after years of marriage. Victoria gave her a knowing look. I wasn't talking about his work ethic, dear. I was talking about you. Eleanor felt a flush creep up her neck. Thomas and Jackson seem intense this morning. This Reed business has them both riled up, Victoria confirmed, sipping her mimosa. Thomas says the man is threatening to go public with concerns about their new AI project. Is there reason for concern? Eleanor asked carefully. Victoria shrugged elegantly. There's always risk in innovation. The men believe the potential benefits outweigh any ethical complexities. The careful phrasing confirmed Eleanor's growing unease. Whatever Jackson and Thomas were developing, it existed in a moral gray area that Ethan had found unacceptable. What would you do, Eleanor asked suddenly, if you discovered Thomas was involved in something you couldn't support? Victoria's perfectly maintained eyebrows rose slightly. An interesting hypothetical, she studied Eleanor for a long moment before responding. In my experience, my dear, marriages at our level are partnerships built on mutual benefit. Personal feelings, approval, disapproval, are secondary considerations. That sounds rather cold. Perhaps, Victoria conceded, but it's practical. We make choices, Eleanor. I chose security, social position, and a certain kind of freedom that only money can provide. If I occasionally look the other way regarding Thomas's business practices or his extracurricular activities, it's a price I've calculated and accepted. And you're happy with that arrangement? Eleanor pressed. Victoria's laugh was genuine but tinged with something darker. Happiness is a luxury, not a right. I'm satisfied with the life I've built. She patted Eleanor's arm. Though I will say, if you're asking these questions now, in year 7 I worry for your future contentment. Before Eleanor could respond, their husbands approached from the beach, discussion abruptly ending as they came within earshot. Jackson's smile was polished, but didn't reach his eyes. Tennis, anyone? He suggested, his arm sliding possessively around Eleanor's waist. I've booked the court for 11. The day proceeded according to Jackson's careful choreography. Tennis, followed by lunch on the terrace, then cocktails by the pool. Eleanor performed her role flawlessly, laughing at the right moments, offering insightful comments when appropriate, maintaining the illusion of the perfect couple. But beneath the performance, something was crystallizing within her, a clarity she had been approaching for weeks, perhaps years. That night, after the Harringtons had retired to their guest suite, Eleanor found Jackson in his study, reviewing documents on his tablet. Even here, supposedly relaxing, work remained his primary focus. Victoria mentioned Ethan is going public with his concerns, she said, closing the door behind her. Jackson glanced up, irritation flashing across his features. Victoria should mind her own business. What is he objecting to, exactly? Eleanor persisted, taking a seat across from him. If the project is above board, why not address his concerns? Because his concerns would delay implementation by months, if not years, Jackson snapped. We'd lose our competitive edge. The market doesn't reward ethical hand-wringing, Eleanor. It rewards results. Even if those results potentially harm people. Jackson set down his tablet, his full attention now focused on her. This conversation seemed suspiciously well-informed for someone who allegedly only exchanged pleasantries with Reed. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. You didn't answer my question. I don't need to, he replied coldly. My business decisions aren't subject to your approval. Your job is to support me, not question me. My job? Eleanor repeated, the word landing like a slap. Is that how you see me, an employee? Don't be dramatic, Jackson dismissed. You know exactly what I mean. We each have our roles in this marriage. I handle business, you handle everything else. And what if I want more than everything else? Eleanor asked, the question that had been building for years finally given voice. What if I want a partnership based on mutual respect, not assigned roles? Jackson regarded her with something between confusion and contempt. We had an understanding when we married. If you've suddenly decided you want to renegotiate the terms, I'm afraid you'll find me an unwilling participant. The coldness of his response should have hurt, but instead, it provided the final clarity Eleanor needed. This wasn't a marriage. It was a contract, one with terms that had once seemed acceptable but now felt like chains. I'm going back to the city tonight, she said, rising from her chair. Don't be ridiculous, Jackson replied. It's nearly midnight. I'll call a car service. His expression hardened. If this is about Reed, it's about me, Eleanor interrupted. For once, Jackson, this isn't about you or your business or your reputation. It's about who I am and who I want to be. And who is that, exactly? He asked, his tone mocking. The Eleanor who was drowning in medical debt before I came along? The gallery assistant with an expensive education and limited prospects? That Eleanor? His cruelty was calculated to remind her of her vulnerability, to underscore her dependence. In the past it might have worked. Tonight it only strengthened her resolve. Yes, she said quietly. That Eleanor, the one who had dreams beyond being an accessory to someone else's success. Jackson's laugh was cold. Dreams don't pay bills, Eleanor. Reality does. And the reality is, you signed a prenuptial agreement that leaves you with very little if you walk away, especially if infidelity is involved. I haven't been unfaithful, she stated, the technical truth providing small comfort. Yet, Jackson amended, but we both know where this is heading. You leave tonight, and I'll have divorce papers drawn up by morning. Choose carefully. Eleanor studied the man she had married. Handsome, successful, utterly certain of his power over her. She had once mistaken that certainty for strength, that control for stability. Now she saw it clearly, fear masked as authority, insecurity, disguised as confidence. "I'll send for my things," she said simply, turning toward the door. "Eleanor." His voice stopped her. For a moment, something almost like vulnerability flickered across his features. "Don't throw away everything we've built over some romantic notion of finding yourself. The real world doesn't work that way." "Maybe not," she conceded. "But I can't keep living in a world where happiness is considered a luxury rather than a necessity." "He won't make you happy," Jackson warned, his composure cracking slightly. "Men like Reed talk about ethics and feelings, but when reality hits, bills, responsibilities, compromises, they retreat to their principles and leave practical people to clean up the mess." Eleanor shook her head sadly. "This isn't about Ethan. It's about me finally recognizing that I've been slowly disappearing inside this marriage. Whether he's in my future or not, I can't stay here and keep vanishing." Jackson's expression closed like a door slamming shut. "Then go," he said coldly. "But remember what you're giving up. There's no coming back from this." In their bedroom, Eleanor packed quickly, taking only what she had brought for the weekend. The rest, the designer clothes, the jewelry, the trappings of Mrs. Montgomery, could wait. Tonight was about traveling light, about shedding the weight she had carried for too long. The car service arrived within 30 minutes. As the driver loaded her single suitcase into the trunk, Eleanor took one last look at the Hamptons house, its imposing silhouette dark against the star-filled sky. Jackson watched from the terrace, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, his posture rigid with anger and disbelief. As the car pulled away, Eleanor felt a curious sensation spreading through her chest, not the crushing anxiety she had expected, but something lighter, almost buoyant. Freedom, she realized. The terrifying, exhilarating feeling of choosing her own path for the first time in years. She directed the driver to take her to a modest hotel in Manhattan, not ready to contact anyone until she had gathered her thoughts. In the quiet of the car, she finally allowed herself to acknowledge the magnitude of what she had done, left behind security, status, and certainty for an undefined future. And yet, despite the practical challenges ahead, she felt more herself than she had in years. It was as if she had been holding her breath underwater and had finally surfaced, gulping in air that was both painful and essential. At the hotel, Eleanor checked in under her maiden name, a small act of reclamation that felt surprisingly significant. In her room, she stood before the mirror, studying her reflection as if meeting a long-lost friend. "Hello, Eleanor Bennett," she whispered, testing the sound of her original identity. Her phone buzzed with messages from Jackson, threats alternating, with attempts at reconciliation, promises followed by warnings. She silenced it, not ready to engage with the storm she had unleashed. Instead, she opened her laptop and did something she hadn't done in years, searched for academic positions in art history and curation. Most required recent experience or publications, qualifications she lacked after her years as Mrs. Montgomery. But one posting caught her eye. A small gallery connected to a community college was seeking someone to develop educational programs. The salary was modest, but the opportunity to reconnect with her passion was priceless. Eleanor drafted an application, pouring her heart into the cover letter. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead: financial insecurity, legal battles, with Jackson, the judgment of their social circle. But for the first time in years, she was moving towards something rather than away from emptiness. Dawn was breaking when she finally closed her laptop and lay down, exhaustion overtaking anxiety. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, awakening to midday sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, disorientation washed over her. Where was the imported Italian bedding, the carefully controlled room temperature, the silent efficiency of the penthouse? Then memory returned, bringing with it both trepidation and resolve. Her phone showed dozens of missed calls and messages. She scrolled through them quickly, freezing when she saw Ethan's name. "Heard rumors about developments with Aegis. Are you okay? Call if you need anything." Eleanor hesitated, her finger hovering over his name. It would be so easy to reach out to seek comfort in this upheaval, but something held her back, the need to find her footing independently before complicating her life further. Instead, she called Mia from the gallery. "I've left Jackson," she said without preamble when her friend answered. "I need a place to stay for a while, and possibly a job." Mia's response was immediate and unhesitating. "My spare room is yours for as long as you need. And as for work, we've been talking about expanding our educational programming for years. Sounds like the perfect time to start." Relief flooded through Eleanor, the practical support more touching than any sympathetic words. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I know it won't be easy when Jackson starts." "Let him try," Mia interrupted fiercely. "Some things are worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for." Within hours, Eleanor had relocated to Mia's cozy apartment in Brooklyn, a world away from the sterile luxury of Manhattan's Upper East Side. The space was cluttered with books, art, and the cheerful disorder of a life lived authentically rather than performed perfectly. That evening, as they shared a bottle of wine on Mia's tiny balcony, Eleanor's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Mrs. Montgomery, this is Carlos Jenkins, Thomas Harrington's executive assistant." The young man's voice was tense. "Mr. Harrington asked me to call you directly." "There's been a situation with Mr. Montgomery." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "What kind of situation?" "After you left, there was an incident. Mr. Montgomery became extremely agitated and suffered what appears to be a stress-induced cardiac event. He's stable now, but—" "Where is he?" Eleanor interrupted, already rising from her chair. "Mount Sinai. Mr. Harrington thought you should know despite circumstances." Eleanor thanked him and ended the call, her mind racing. "Jackson's in the hospital," she explained to Mia. "Heart-related. I need to go." "Are you sure?" Mia asked gently. "After everything he said and done?" Eleanor paused, considering the question. Was this obligation, residual love, or simply human decency? 7 years is a long time, she said finally. "Whatever happened between us, I need to see this through properly." At the hospital, Thomas met her in the waiting room, his usually confident demeanor subdued. "The doctors say he'll recover fully," he assured her. "But it was a wake-up call. He's been pushing himself too hard for too long." "May I see him?" Thomas hesitated. "He's angry, Eleanor. More hurt than I've ever seen him." "Are you sure you want to walk into that?" "I need to," she replied simply. Jackson looked diminished against the white hospital sheets, medical equipment surrounding him like sentinels. When he saw her, emotions flashed across his face in rapid succession: relief, anger, humiliation, resignation. "Come to assess the damage?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual strength. "I came because I still care what happens to you," Eleanor replied honestly, taking a seat beside his bed. "Despite everything." A long silence stretched between them, filled with the beeping of monitors and the weight of unspoken truths. "I thought you were bluffing," Jackson admitted finally. "In 7 years, you've never defied me." "Maybe that was part of the problem," Eleanor suggested gently. Another silence, this one contemplative rather than hostile. "The doctors say I need to reduce stress," Jackson said, gesturing to the machines monitoring his condition. "Apparently, my management style is unsustainable." Their words. "What will you do?" "Adapt." He met her gaze directly. "That's what successful people do, Eleanor. They recognize changing conditions and adjust accordingly." Eleanor nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. Jackson Montgomery would never admit he was wrong, never acknowledge that his approach to business or marriage had fundamental flaws, but in his way, he was offering a concession. "I've received the preliminary divorce papers," she told him. "The terms are punitive." "Yes," he acknowledged without apology, "written when I was angry." "And now?" Jackson studied her for a long moment. "Now I recognize that holding you against your will serves neither of us. I've instructed my lawyers to draft more equitable terms. Not generous," he qualified quickly, "but fair. Enough for you to start over without hardship. The concession was so unexpected that Eleanor found herself momentarily speechless. "Thank you," she managed finally. "Don't mistake this for weakness," Jackson warned. "It's pragmatism. A protracted legal battle helps neither of us." Eleanor nodded, understanding that this was as close to grace as Jackson could manage. "What about Ethan, the project?" A flash of the old hardness returned to Jackson's eyes. "Reed has made his choice. He'll have to live with the consequences." "Jackson." "But," he continued, cutting off her protest, "certain modifications to the project might be implemented. Minor adjustments to address some of the more legitimate concerns." It wasn't a full concession, but it was movement, a crack in the wall of absolute certainty that had defined their relationship. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Jackson caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man confined to a hospital bed. "Are you going to him?" The question was direct, unavoidable. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Right now, I'm focused on finding myself first." Jackson released her hand, nodding slowly. "I underestimated you," he admitted. "That was my mistake." Outside the hospital, Eleanor took a deep breath of evening air. The weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future balanced precariously on her shoulders. She had ended one chapter without knowing how the next would begin. As she hailed a taxi back to Brooklyn, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Heard about Jackson. Also heard you left before it happened. Are you okay? No pressure, no expectations." Eleanor stared at the screen, weighing her response carefully. The connection between them was real, powerful, potentially transformative. But she needed time. Time to rediscover herself, to build a foundation that wasn't dependent on another person's vision. "I'm finding my way," she typed finally. "One step at a time. Rain check on that next gallery visit?" His response came quickly. "For as long as you need. The art isn't going anywhere. Neither am I." Smiling, Eleanor tucked her phone away and gave the driver Mia's address. The future stretched before her, uncertain but alive with possibility. For the first time in years, she was writing her own story, not as Jackson Montgomery's wife, or even potentially as Ethan Reed's partner, but as Eleanor Bennett, a woman rediscovering her voice after years of silence. The taxi merged into Manhattan. Traffic, carrying her away from the life she had known toward one she would create word by word, choice by choice, day by day. The journey wouldn't be easy, but it would be hers, and that made all the difference. Fimda Historia. Dear listeners, we hope that Eleanor's journey of self-discovery and courage has touched your hearts. The path to finding ourselves is rarely straight and often requires us to make difficult choices between comfort and authenticity. If Eleanor's story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives that explore the complexities of human relationships and personal growth. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe, like Eleanor, that it's never too late to reclaim your voice and rewrite your story. We've created a special playlist of similar stories about transformation and renewal that you can find by clicking to your left. Remember to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. Until our next story, remember that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself.